We're all familiar with oil companies. I mean, they, to an extent, control our entire lives, right? Seeing how they've destroyed the environment and are doing practically nothing to try and fix it. But some of our lives are controlled by oil companies a little bit more than others, seeing that Britain's own BP is the entire reason for the Iranian government right now. Yes, Britain's own BP is the reason for the Iranian dictatorship. But why? Of course, the UK is absolutely no stranger to meddling in other countries' business, and Iran is no exception. Our story starts in 1901 with British subject William Knox D'Arcy, who struck a 60-year deal with the Iranian monarchy at the time to have full control over the oil reserves in southern Iran. This caused the creation of what was at the time known as the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, later changed to the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, and then to just British Petroleum or BP. Which, not to spoil the story, but don't you think it's a little bit ironic that the way they decided to deal with, the Iranians not being very happy with Britain taking all of their oil was by removing Iran from the equation completely? Anyway, the establishment of the AIOC allowed the British to begin their tyrannical rule over what they stole from the Iranians. By 1914, the British government had bought out 51% of the shares of the company, which meant they had basically full control over the southwest corner of Iran. The British were, unsurprisingly, not too kind to the Iranians who were working their oil fields. The first strikes began in 1908. However, the major strike was in 1946, when 6,000 workers went on strike. 200 ended up dead, killed by British troops, of course. I mean, imagine that. A world where, you can't even protest without the British government interfering with whatever you're protesting. I mean, that's so completely dystopian, right? D'Arcy's contract also only entitled the Iranian government to about 16% of whatever the company made, which, let's be honest, they didn't usually receive even that much. And D'Arcy was quite reluctant to have anyone who wasn't British checking his books. So the Iranians are in a bit of a sticky situation here. I mean, until the 40s, the British were basically being upheld by what they stole from the Iranians. And the Iranians were seeing absolutely nothing from it, except for, dead oil field workers. So they were starting to get a little bit sick of it. Cue Mohammed Mosaddegh. Mosaddegh was, to say the least, a face of hope for the Iranian people. I mean, they absolutely loved him. Setting him up for a life as a public servant, he was born in 1882 into a family of people with political ties. His father was the Minister of Finance and his mother was part of the royal family at the time. At just the age of 15, he was appointed the Minister of Finance of the Khorasan province in honour of his late father, and by age 24, he was being voted in to be a parliamentary representative despite not even meeting the age requirements. His fight against political corruption began in 1917 when he was working for the Ministry of Finance. However, this did not end up lasting very long because he self-exiled himself to Switzerland in order to try and fight a law the British were trying to pass, in which they would basically have unrestricted access to Iranian military and finances. But the insane law that the British were trying to pass eventually was rejected and Mosaddegh went back to Iran. Now, once back in Iran, he shifted political positions quite a bit. That is until we meet the British-appointed Prime Minister, Reza Khan. Immediately, in the eyes of Mosaddegh, Reza Khan had a terrible vibe. He didn't see him becoming anything but a tyrant, and Mosaddegh was right. The political climate became so bad for someone like Mosaddegh that he ended up moving to a tiny village called Ahmedabad outside of Tehran with his family. Despite stepping away from all parliamentary decisions and moving away, it did not end up helping Mosaddegh very much, as by July 26, 1940, Reza Shah's police had raided his home and sent him to the central prison in Tehran. Later he was moved to a different prison in Burjind, where he, seeing what happened to other people in the same position, assumed his death. Thankfully for Iranian democracy, by November he was moved from the prison to house arrest, and within a month was released from house arrest completely as the British government had removed Reza Shah from power. Which I personally think it's so funny when Western governments put someone in power and then take all the credit for like removing them from power. Like, yes, everyone's totally gonna forget that like you caused the problem in the first place. Once again, Mosaddegh had now returned to politics, this time taking on a very strong stance on foreign policy and not wanting any foreign intervention in Iran, especially their oil reserves. Unsurprisingly, this whole venture was kind of targeted at the British. Addressing the AIOC specifically, he claimed that the moral aspect of oil nationalisation was more important than the economic aspect. And on this premise, he was eventually elected. By April 28th, 1951, Mosaddegh was the Prime Minister of Iran. And of course, when things start looking good for the Iranians, they're starting to look pretty bad for the British. Now, aside from just nationalising the oil reserves, Mosaddegh also promised free elections, and he fought for workers' rights and women's rights, and was overall just the best leader that Iran had had so far. No wonder the British were so mad. Upon seeing this anti-imperialist bastion, the British were starting to question things. I mean, this was the most lucrative operation that they had ever ran. What was going to happen if they couldn't prop up their economy on another country's resources? I mean, they'd be screwed, right? So the British, being absolutely unable to operate without exploiting another country's land, weren't here to play games. They imposed a global boycott on Iran, completely imposing and blocking their ability to trade. And they even used their spy network to keep a track on Iranian activities. But this didn't even really help. Things kept getting better for the Iranians and worse for the British. I mean, even the communists were starting to back Mosaddegh now. So what better time than to bring in the Americans? The newly elected Eisenhower administration were absolutely thrilled by this, and they worked together with Churchill and the CIA to concoct a plan known as Operation Ajax, which was basically just the idea of removing Mosaddegh from power and replacing him with a Shah appointed by the British and the CIA. The Shah was initially resistant, though. I mean, he didn't want to remove Iran's most popular prime minister. But with enough money and anti-Mosaddegh propaganda, the Shah ultimately agreed, and in the summer of 1953, Mosaddegh was dismissed from power. Most of Mossadegh's cabinet was also put either on trial or even killed during the anti-Mossadegh protests that the CIA had staged. As part of these trials, Mosaddegh was ultimately imprisoned for 3 years and then put on house arrest for the rest of his life, which is where he ultimately met his demise in 1967. But the US and the UK were absolutely thrilled. I mean, this was an incredibly successful operation for them. I won't get into the full story of the Iranian Revolution now, as I do think it is a very complex story, but as a brief overview, the secular Pahlavi family stayed in power until the Iranian Revolution, which is where they were overthrown and replaced by the Shia Muslim Ayatollah Ruhollah, and the imperial state was replaced by the Islamic State. They, of course, managed to get out of the complete chokehold that they were in under Western powers, but that doesn't necessarily mean that their system now is much better. It just means that they're not basically a puppet state for the US anymore. Despite everything that Iran has gone through since the death of Mosaddegh, BP has been basically chill. I mean, as chill as an oil company can be, right? In the 90s, BP was absolutely thriving. I mean, they were part of a climate change denial organisation, and they had a whole thing of illegally dumping tons of hazardous materials into the ocean. And of course, in 2010, there was the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, which has had horrific effects on the environment. They have also recently found oil deposits on the coast of Brazil, which they announced alongside the fact that they will now be scaling back their renewable energy efforts and focusing on fossil fuels. Great! That's amazing! Of course. That's just what we wanted. Now, this entire story is really not unique to Iran or this one situation at all. I mean, this has happened across multiple governments and multiple decades. This is just the first one, and it's the one that the UK is probably most implicit in. Western powers absolutely love to just wreck other countries because what's good for these countries isn't in the best interest of the West. Ultimately, the lesson that we have to take from this is that Western governments are really just willing to do anything. that's in their favour. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it'll be in the people's favour. But let's be honest, if you got this far, you probably already knew that anyway. Thank you so much for sticking around till the end of this video. If you have any improvements that I could have made, please feel free to leave them in the comments, or if you have any information that I missed out that you think I should have put in the video, also please put it down in the comments. And yeah, thank you so much for sticking around. See ya!